This
WRC.
conference will now be recorded.
It is a great pleasure from the WRC for accepting our invitation. Thank you very much, sir. Now I will tell Preeti to just have a formal introduction of Sudip, sir, Sudip Modi. Yeah, Preeti. Can you give a formal introduction?
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. I am CA Preeti Cherian. It is my pleasure to introduce you today's speaker, CA Sudip Modi. Sudip Modi is an Associate Director in Governance, Risk and Compliance Services Practice and has been working with PwC India since June 2020, having an experience of 11 years. Prior to this, he was with KPMG for 8 years and he has over 8 years of professional experience serving large-scale infrastructure projects for roads, transmission and solar plants, and energy sector projects. Currently, he's managing Asia's biggest cement manufacturing company and India's largest power transformer manufacturing company. He specializes in process designing and transformation, internal audit, internal control framework, and enterprise risk management for infrastructure projects. He has designed and implemented and internal audit for one of India's largest infra companies and has assisted the client in designing revenue assurance audit tools and management dashboards for monitoring critical KPIs for the road business. Over to you, Sudeep. We are all very eager to listen to you. Thank you.
And thanks, Preeti, for the nice introduction. Good evening, team. Sudeep this side. So just to add on to my introduction from the ERM perspective, I have an experience of doing an ERM engagements with around 10 Nifty 50 clients. So I'll just like to share my knowledge with you and have a quite two-way communication session, and I'll be open to any questions or queries from your side. And meanwhile, in case you feel that there's too much to absorb or you need some detailed discussion on some topic, I'll be ready for that as well. So
Sudip, 1 minute, please. So I'll request every team member to mute themselves, and please participate in the during this entire session 5 to 7. Otherwise, one-way communication is not going to be very effective for all of us. Thank you so much. Continue, please.
Yeah. Thanks, Gaurav. So the agenda of this session is to first make aware of what is ERM. So many of you may not be from this domain itself, and ERM may be new concept to you for that purpose. Then what are the elements which are there in ERM framework, and how we then how we assess the maturity of ERM framework. So largely, and I'll just also have some few examples and some graphical presentation for the ease of discussion. Yeah, so ideally when we say ERM, some of the myths we have is that ERM is about risk identification, which are more often operational in nature. It is one-time activity, or it is largely a strategic risk or a entity risk. But then ERM is more to that. ERM is entire function, and so it includes the culture, capabilities, and practices the company follows in order to manage to integrate it with its strategy and performance to manage the risk for conserving, so creating and preserving the value. So how is it different? So many times I come across this question is that the ERM is all about identifying top 10 risk and mitigating that, but it is more to it. We are dealing with culture of the organization, where the company has a capability and the practices. So we'll touch upon a lot of things where you'll be getting aware that how it really affects the company as a whole. So again, it is a performance focused process, because again it is how we allocate the resources and manage the risk to achieve the desired objective. So an entire process, business objectives are most important. For example, if today DMart wants to be biggest retail chain in India, they have to have a business objective, and what are the risks to it? Risk will only come if you have an objective. If you want to become a CA, then there is a risk. If you don't want to become a CA, then there is a limited risk from the education perspective, or risk of failure is pretty less. That is how important it is. This is the fulcrum point, also magnetic north to the entire process. This business objective has to be kept in the center, and then then it should be projected as a business tool rather than just a compliance tool. The biggest mistake people make it, they treat it as a compliance tool and rather than a strategic decision making tool. Again, risk-based information decision making is very important. We do it whenever we make a decision. It is generally based on the risk only, but it is more of what informal, or it is rather than documented, or it is more of a what I'll say people unknowingly are concerned about the risk, but then it is not informed, or it is not well backed with the statistics and other insights. So every decision making tomorrow, if you are going to start a business, you'll do a risk analysis first, but it may not be in a formal structure. So the entire process is to give a formal structure to the thing. Okay. Now starting with the thing is, what are the questions that ERM can answer for you? What is my risk? If I am tomorrow, for example, Tata Motors, what is my risk? Electric vehicle is a new technology, that is a risk. Is it significant? It is spread across the organization. Attrition, for example, is attrition for a particular department or across the department? And who owns the risk? Technically, when we say attrition is a risk, does it belong to HR team or business as well? So that is very important. Who owns the risk? Many times the risk is not just owned by one individual, but it is spread across, and senior management is required for same. For example, tomorrow if you have a cyber risk, so cyber risk is IT has to own a risk, but then the business are equally responsible for such risk, for mitigation of such risk and implementation of risk. Who owns the risk is very important. Then do the mitigation plans exist for the significant risk? For example, tomorrow if you Tata Motors finds that electric vehicle is a high risk, do they have a business strategy around that? How they are planning to do they have a designs, technical capabilities to manage the risk? So for example, Nokia is a clear example. We all recall that they didn't had a clear mitigation plans when the Android came into the market. So that is a risk, again, the risk they have. So again, is the risk mitigation plan comprehensive enough? For example, tomorrow there's an attrition, so just giving a bonus is not good enough. If the people want work from home policy, you have to abide by that. So attritions are pretty well managed. Are these plans practicable and actionable? For something like in a manufacturing company, if there is an attrition and you say that work from home policies can be implemented, it is not practical. So we have again, whatever mitigating action plan you are planning or implementing, whether it is going to address the risk and whether the same is evaluated. So entirely, to sum up the things, it helps us in the timely risk information and how effectively we are able to manage the risk. Is the risk being reviewed and reassessed? It is very important that it should not be a one-time activity, and it should be risk identification and review as a continuous activity at various levels. Finally, the more important thing is, are we tracking the emerging risk? For example, tomorrow there's in a steel market, there was an export ban. Whether people were envisaging that, they should have. That was an emerging risk when there was high inflation in the domestic market and prices of steel was rising. So were there any mitigating plans? Tata Steel have to have some mitigating plans around that to cater the domestic requirements, since there is a duty on export of steel. So this is the overall framework why ERM is required and how ERM can help us. Now from compliance point of view, ERM, there are requirements. First is the board report as per section 134 clearly wants that in the director report that company has to define and implement risk management policy and identify all the risk which may threaten the existence of the company. Again, in the company's audit committee as well, there should be clear evaluation of internal financial controls and risk management systems. From the independent director perspective, independent director has to satisfy themselves on the integrity of financial statements and the systems for the risk management are robust or defensible. And from the listing agreement point of view, there has been a lot of changes. The board member have to be informed about the risk assessment and minimization procedures. There are new requirements. So as for May 2021 regulations, clearly now top 1,000 company needs to have a risk management committee. There are certain changes in their constitution, quorum, roles and responsibilities of the risk management committee, and a CRO appointment has been one of the requirements. Now, finally, since we are doing it, there's one case study. Why ERM? So there's an example in Infosys. So in Infosys, what really happened in Infosys in its early days in 1990s and 2000 had a lot of strategic reliance on General Electrics, where GE Electrics, where their share was more than 10%. Revenue share was more than 10%. Almost 1/3 of the revenue came from GE, and GE had cleared bargaining power. So GE had some tough years, and they wanted a rate cut of 10%. But luckily, Infosys management was proactive, and they had a strong risk management system, and they had developed the European market simultaneously as well as Asian markets, and then their dependency on this particular client had really reduced, so they were in better position to negotiate with GE, and even with the rate cuts and everything, they were able to, with the client share going down, they were able to sustain in the market, and it's a clear example. Other examples are like Reliance Industry. We can clearly see how Reliance Industry had a clear dependency in till 2010 on the other oil and gas sector, but with the
Sudeep,
hmm.
Sudeep,
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you. So
hmm.
Murtaza sir has joined.
Yeah.
So just allow me for 1 minute. Murtaza sir.
Yeah, hi Murtaza.
Hi, Bhavin. Hello, Bhavin.
Yeah,
I think Sudeep, you continue. I am around, and
Okay,
maybe I can do it little later. Don't break it. You continue with this.
sure.
Yes, please. Yes, please.
So people, so we can see in case of Reliance Industry that their biggest risk in the Reliance Industry had it in early days, but before this decade, was their dependency on oil and gas sector. They clearly know oil and gas sector may run out of business or it may not be sustainable due to the ESG norms. So they clearly diversified their portfolio into media, retail, and telecom and green energy. And right now, their dependency is less than 30% on oil and gas sector. Similarly, in Tata Group, we found that there are a lot of innovation challenges. Group company structuring was not that great, and even debt management problems were there. And we can clearly see how Tata Motors have innovated. TCS and Tata Steel have had a lot of innovation in their processes, and a lot of companies has restructured, and many of them, few of them has been sold off. Not a core business entities were sold off. Even debt management was pretty well managed, and that can be reflected in their share prices as well until recently. So again, the next example is L&T, how they de-risk their business from infra company to an IT service enabled service and technology sector. So right now, 50% of valuation of L&T is more coming from technology sector rather than just infrastructure sector. We associate L&T with infrastructure, but then if you really see, they have three big giant companies in IT sectors: Mindshare, L&T Technology, and L&T LTI. So these are three listed companies. You can see how they have diversified themselves, and in Indian scenario where infrastructure is always a pain area in the business, from the business side of it. Even the oil marketing companies and NTPC have diversified from oil and gas to renewable energy. They have a 20 or 30 years plan to move more to the renewable energy side. So people have associated their business objectives and risk management together. Now, just a layman from the comprehensive perspective, this is more of a disclosures which an infra company has made in their annual accounts. This is a more of a public document where I have just mapped 7 companies and how they assess the risks. So technology in an infrastructure company is a growing risk. It's one of the emerging risks. Maybe 5 years ago, people were not focused, but then technology has been one of the risks which L&T clearly projects. L&T has created a new department called L&T Next that clearly focuses on manufacturing technology. There are geopolitical risks, project clearances, competition risks. Many of them are uniform, but then some are not clearly identified by some companies and some are there. So this is just to give a bird eye view how the risk affects each particular sector. Now, few of the emerging risk is cybersecurity. Every company is having a cybersecurity as a major risk item. This has been, we couldn't find it 10 years ago, but then every company board is really worried on cybersecurity, data protection, these and social risks and are emerging risks in the ecosystem. So when we say, so this is considering this session is largely onto the ERM maturity. How we assess the ERM maturity is more of a framework maturity. So we need to understand what is an ERM framework. So ERM, when we say it is entire function that works together and define a culture to the organization, how to manage the risk. So in a company, ideally, how an ERM structure, organization structure looks like. Generally, the board is overall responsible for the risk management activities and ensure that policies, procedures, and are robust enough and they able to manage the business risk. So board is primarily responsible, but then with the new amendments, risk management committee is mandatory for top 1,000 companies, and even there are new guidelines around that. So in a risk management company, there is amendments that at least there should be 3 members. There should be a representation from the board. There should be an independent directors. So there are new LODR requirements coming up for the listed companies. So again, many chief risk officer is mandatory for few companies, but it is recommended to have chief risk officer to manage the risk and across the companies and monitor the risk and help risk management committees in coordination and licensing of risk. So chief risk officers are nowadays, many companies are appointing chief risk officers, and then comes a management layer. So generally, risk management council, many companies have it for discussion of risk and managing and for workshop purpose and to identify top risk before they are presented to the risk management committee and the board. So ideally, risk owners are the main drivers of it. They are the function heads who have to identify the risk, manage the risk, and mitigate the risk. But then all the risk cannot be managed and mitigated by the single department. So there is a council or a committee formed to discuss a few of the risks which requires interdepartmental cooperation. So any queries or concerns or thoughts on that? Should I go ahead? So generally,
Sudeep, I had just one question. Hi,
yeah.
Sudeep. You know, the earlier slide you did mention about the cyber risk emerging as one of the top, and naturally it is. But why do I see a tick only against 2 of these companies?
So
Is that
see,
because they have
generally
not
this
yet
is
updated?
no. See, this is an annual financial statement. So it may
Okay.
not. They may be managing internally, but then they haven't disclosed in their financials.
Correct. Okay.
So we have a limited source on that. Yeah. So again, so this is a basic structure many companies follow. But few companies doesn't have a risk management council or steering body. Some companies do have it, but from board, risk management committees and risk owners are mandatory to have. So risk owners are the generally function or division heads running the function, and they may appoint the risk coordinators or risk champions who can assist them in risk management activity for the department. Now coming to the overall roles and responsibilities of the risk management committee. So as we mentioned, as per the LODR requirement, minimum 3 members are required. Majority of the members should be representation of the board, and at least one independent director should be part of the RMC. So these are the new regulations as per May 2021 guidelines. Again, they clearly what it. So this is again amendment. There are a few amendments there in recent guidelines. So clearly the responsibility has been laid down on the RMC to formulate the policy, and again to ensure that there's a framework to identify the risk, external, internal risk, whether financial, operational, or sectorial risk, but and ESG risk. So ESG risk has been a new inclusion along with cyber risk. So these are, so irrespective of whatever risk you are discussing, ESG and cyber security has to be discussed in the board meeting. These has been specifically included for the discussion purpose in the risk management committee. Again, the risk management committee has to ensure that risk measures taken for risk mitigations along with the systems and processes for internal controls are in place, and there has been particular inclusion on the business continuity planning. So again, post COVID, SEBI realized that business continuity planning is really important. At least this has to be implemented for top 1,000 companies. So business continuity planning is another domain where risk management committee has to ensure that it should not be just from the IT perspective, but all the other sensitive parameters are being addressed. It may be earthquake, or it may be your physical infrastructure. So that, but you must have a policy and framework and mechanism around that to monitor the sensitivity, whether what is an impact due to a particular event. So coming to the responsibilities of the risk management committee, it clearly says that they have to ensure that appropriate methodology, processes, and systems are in place to monitor and evaluate the risk associated with the business, and also monitor and oversee the implementation of risk management policy and adequacy of risk management systems. So a lot of things we will be able to go into the detail in subsequent slides. So from the review perspective, the policy, risk management policy, has to be reviewed once in 2 years. So this is also new inclusion, and what they have, risk management committee have to, there has been some
So, Sakina, so all the questions will be replied at the end of the session. So it is my request. Okay. So
there is
please pose the
some
question.
lag. So again, it is a responsibility of risk management committee to appraise the directors on the what discussions and key matters which are happening in the risk management committee, and keep the board of directors informed. Again, the risk management committee has been given empowerment to appoint, remove, and decide the remuneration of chief management risk officer. So this is very important. So independence of the chief risk officer has been assured in this particular clause. So management override doesn't, and there's no under-reporting of risks since the independence has been given to risk chief risk officer under this clause. Now coming to the chief risk officer, although there's no particular roles defined in the SEBI guidelines, but largely the roles remain that chief risk officer will act like a custodian of the risk register, coordinate between the risk owners for the periodic updates. Generally, risk registers uh, uh, has to be so risk registers has to be updated by the risk owners, but then somebody has to review it and ensure that these are well updated. So there has been some. Are you able to see the screen? Yeah. So as chief risk officer, many companies do appoint it. It is not mandatory as per the SEBI guidelines, except few companies. But then, as from the role perspective, generally they are. Should I reshare the screen for once?
Yes, 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 please.
Hello.
Yes, Sudip.
So, so one of the questions was whether ERM is mandatory for top 1,000 companies or yes. See, ERM risk management system is mandatory for all the companies. Now, maturity may differ. So again, in this clause, you can clearly see that irrespective whether companies is listed or not, it is mandatory for all the companies to have a risk management system, whether public or private. For proper ERM framework, listed companies needs to have a more robust and detailed framework, and which needs to be reviewed by the board and risk management committee. But then basic risk management policy is required by all the companies.
खर्चा लिखी होता सारे खर्चे लिखे होते
Hope that answers your question. Yeah, coming to this particular thing, the other roles and responsibilities of chief risk officer is to oversee the risk management function, ERM function, including the monitoring of implementation of risk management plan, early warning systems, and even provide the relevant support to the risk owners in terms of people, process, technology. Again, I'm coming to the old example, attrition. So attrition is a risk and HR cannot manage himself. It has to be discussed as a larger forum, and it has to be a holistic answer to it. It cannot be that HR will just roll out some incentive policy and the attritions will be addressed. It is more of a cultural issues within the organization, and accordingly a suitable risk mitigation plan has to be devised, which may include business teams, HR, then admin, and maybe from process owners or even the maybe CFOs due to budget constraints and everything. So this really requires a lot of coordination to develop a risk mitigating plan. And so in many companies also risk management officer is responsible for training, awareness sessions, doing risk culture surveys. So these are the roles and largely a role responsibility of chief risk officers. Now from the risk owner perspective, risk owners are generally department heads or the respective function heads or location heads who are responsible to identify the risk pertaining to their functions or departments and assess the risk, whether it's high, medium, or low, and what are the mitigation and again the mitigating actions. So tomorrow, a compliance officer needs to validate whether the legal compliance has been done for the location, labor license has been obtained. So if in case there are notices, he has to report to the board. Again, there are ways and means in which risk assessments are metrics as parameters are defined, and accordingly he has to identify the risk pertaining to that department. Example, in case of health, plant head needs to identify health and safety risk and report it to the board if it exceeds the threshold limit. So it is a basic primary responsibility of risk owners to identify the risk, record them in the risk registers, assess what is a high, medium, low, and develop mitigating action plan. And these risks has to be monitored and reported accordingly. Now, so this is more of a first line of defense thing. So again, from the completeness perspective, chief risk officer may have validated the completeness, whether all risk has been defined or not. So for the assistance purpose, the risk champions can be appointed by the risk owners to help them coordinate and assisting in risk management activities within the department. So ideally, how does a risk management policy look like? So it generally has a risk governance structure, then it has other parameters like risk process and reporting mechanism. So generally a risk policies will cover its definitions on risk, what is the risk, appetite, risk mitigation, and basic definitions, and reference to the Kosovo and ISO 31000, and then what is the objective of this policy. See, this is very important. The policy objective will decide the tone from the top, what the senior management sees in the risk management, how they see that, what culture they want to set, and the scope of the policy, where it is applicable, on which entities is applicable, which locations is applicable. So they clearly decide the scope. Many companies do have some carve-outs depending on their organization structure. So, and policies and procedures need to be reviewed once in 2 years. That is again a mandate, and updated accordingly. Board may delegate this review and updation of policy to the RMC. They have a right to delegate this power. Now, other elements which are covered is risk organization structure. We discussed Again, what are the roles and responsibilities of each layer of activity, each for each level. Then it clearly defines the risk management process. It includes methods. Again, the risk management process can be quite wide. It may be from the brainstorming sessions or workshop sessions or reading external content or referring to the competition reports or learning from the project, recent learnings, or maybe from the again, there are various sources and means through you identify the risk and document it. Now coming to the risk assessment, again, how you, when you identify risk, how you assess whether it's high, medium, low, what is an impact, what is the likelihood. Because again, see, in business there are going to be n number of risks. Every risk cannot be managed. The company needs to identify top risk and mitigate the same. They cannot mitigate all the risk of the business, so they have to prioritize the risk and focus on the 10, 15, 20 risk at the senior management level, whom they can be mitigated, and low risk can be mitigated by the business owners itself. For his health and safety risk, if it's more of a people issue, then process owners need to be sensitized accordingly, and a risk mitigation plan can be clearly demarcated at the process owners level. But then if there's a funding issue or it's a technology issue, then it has to be escalated to the right forum and discussed accordingly. So risk prioritization again depends on the rating of the risk. If it's high, it will require the senior management involvement, then it will be high priority, and if it requires a junior management, then it will be a low priority. So we have a parameters decide for the same. So again, in the policy document, we clearly document how the risk mitigation will happen, whether new controls will be required, new strategy will be required, new infrastructure will be required. So that clearly defines the process around that. And risk monitoring and reporting part. So risk monitoring and reporting is what level with particular risk will be reported, how it will be reported, and how it will be monitored. So we have a detailed discussion around that in the subsequent slide as well. Again, the other elements of policy should cover is on the training part and awareness part. Communication protocols. Again, when we say training and awareness, it also includes the training of the senior management. Whenever there's induction in the board, there should be a training which should be given. Whenever there's an induction of employee training, risk management training should be given, and periodic training should be given on a need basis. So these are the various elements which a policy should cover. Communication protocol is very important, since it includes escalation, when the risk has to be escalated, when it has to be reported, how it has to be reported. So these are generally covered in communication protocol and risk culture. So this is an important element most of the companies misses out. This is a new development that many companies look for, how they perceive the risk. So in the later slide, in the subsequent slide, we'll have a detailed discussion around that. What does the risk culture mean? So many entities have a goal that they want to grow fast. They want to prioritize growth over profits. So accordingly, they will have a high risk appetite for the bad debts. So, but then their culture should be inbuilt in such a manner that sales are more important rather than margins, and accordingly they should set a culture. Ethics policy should be also shared. So a lot of elements are there. We'll cover in the subsequent slides. So when we are covering now, we are covering risk framework maturity assessment, enterprise risk management maturity assessment. So largely, if you see voice of the stakeholders, so when they say risk management, so what we generally hear from the clients, the client really says that risk management works in isolation from the strategies on objectives. So for example, an infra company focusing on roads generally identifies the risk for the water business. That doesn't make sense. Or tomorrow Demand, who's a purely brick and mortar company, they identify risk in the e-com business. It doesn't make sense. Or it may happen that you are just focusing on your health and safety risk rather than external risk like business threats, inflation, cost pressures, or maybe expand your competition risk. Then you're not focusing on it because your objectives are not clearly aligned with the risk management activities. They work in isolation. So whenever its first step is to define the objective and then analyze. For example, if tomorrow TCS has to grow 3 times, then it has to develop risk accordingly. Or Tata Steel wants to upgrade its production, maybe they have to double their production. They have to, then the risk will be land acquisition, market, that will be a risk. Whether there's adequate market, whether they will have a right infrastructure, whether they'll have right funding. So these are the risks for them. Okay, then it cannot be that people are just focused on existing risk and it is not interrelated with the objectives and strategies. Again, the risk management activities are, what we hear is largely focused to the limited management. Senior management come in the meeting room, 5-6 people decide the risk for the company, where 2,000 people are engaged, and then they present it to the management. There is a lot of practice. Only the middle management, few people, CXOs meet and identify the risk. It should be bottom up and top down approach. Both should work together, where the risks are identified with the process owners and discussed and presented to the senior management. And senior management, since they have a more outside perspective and they have a strategy view of the business, they should present their risk and deliberate in the work group and the workshops. Again, the many fault areas we see is the risk are more for inward looking. So employees of the company, what we see is generally are more focused on the inward looking. They are not really worried on competitions or maybe inflation or cost pressures or tax changes in tax regimes, political risk. They are really focused on their internal risk, like production related issues or operational related issues or logistics related issues, operational matters. They are really focused on operational matters and they don't have the outside perspective. Like I've seen a lot of companies, they haven't identified cyber security as a risk or ESG. In maybe tomorrow, if you interview 10 CXOs, they will clearly say that ESG is a major risk. But if you interview the middle management for ESG, that it is not still a risk for them. So clearly, many listed companies also have the inward view, and they don't really appoint the third party or external consultants or do a scanning, external risk scanning to identify or do a competition analysis to get a views. For in infra company, technology in many companies still is not a risk. But then clearly how the technology is changing from construction of activities to cold rolling mill or bitumen layout, automation is happening in quality management. They clearly don't see this as a risk and threat to their companies and how inefficiently they are working. Primary, again, the focus is largely on the operational matters instead of strategic matters. So if people want to just present their problems to the management, so they clearly say, for example, in a chemical company, 8 risks will be out of 20 risks will be indirectly related to production, storage management, or health and safety, and they will end up saying that it may lead to the accident. That has been a feedback of a lot of CFOs, that senior middle management and the lot of senior management people from operation doesn't understand the risk activities and they are largely focused on the operational matters, and it doesn't give a total holistic perspective which the challenges company will face in next 5 years. Risk has to be seen from what are the threats and challenges company will face in next 5 years. Probably government policies may change, or product portfolio may change, or compliance. Europe, maybe tomorrow there is some compliance from the third export, maybe in European market, which may affect the exports. That is not clearly a focus. Again, the risk management is, the risk registers are not updated at times. People just do it one time activity and keep on repeating it. No risks are identified. Even the risks are not clearly defined. As I mentioned, maybe in a cement manufacturing company, they will say clearly non-availability of raw material. That is one of the risks they will clearly identify from the plant level instead of seeing from the other perspective. The risks are largely silo-based and non-coordination. Again, the challenges is from not just from risk identification but mitigation as well. Where they if you have a compliance mindset, then the mitigation plans and even the risks doesn't have a holistic approach, and it doesn't have a coordination between the functions. For example, we have seen in lot of cases where maybe for example, health and safety perspective, people are just writing that it is a risk and that it is, but then They are not really reaching out to finance team for the funding purpose and other purpose, and their risks are mentioned in the isolated purpose, and there is no coordinated risk mitigation plan. So that's the reason it is very important to have, whenever there is a risk mitigation plan, it has to be discussed across the function in case and in a risk in a council, and there has to be a council, management council, where these are discussed and holistic action plan is defined at a company level. Again, the risk is, what we see is the risk management is largely short-term focus. They just mitigate it. Tomorrow, if there is a warehousing issue or something, or a storage issue, they will just clearly say that it is a space constraint rather than building a capacity or just-in-time approach around that. It is more of a mitigating the risk for the 12 months or next for a year or 2 years. So it doesn't have a long-term solution. For attritions, they may say that just change the salary structure for 1 year, but it may not really help in a long run. You need a new talents, and it may require an organizational transformation from the HR, from the manpower perspective, or you may require a change in skill sets. But that clearly is not the focus of the process owners. In many companies, risk management structure itself is not defined. So they don't have a permanent CROs. It is largely done by some finance function for the compliance purpose. So this maturity doesn't come. No one is there to assess what is the technology need to identify the risk, monitor the risk. Coming to other areas like ERM functions, largely works in isolation. There is no interlinkage with internal audits or other line of defenses, first line of defenses. Do they have a compliance monitoring system or not? It is generally ERM activities happen in a isolated manner. Next point is in regards to emerging risk. So there is no external risk scanning system. They keep on repeating the same risk in every meeting, and there's a stagnancy to the approach. It's very important to keep on identifying new risk and accordingly plan your business objectives and mitigation action plans. So the mitigation action plans are not well defined. This is another element. These are generally half-hearted and very myopic and operational in nature rather than giving a strategic view to it. And it will be more of a disciplinary action. So tomorrow, if there's health and safety issue, they will keep on saying we'll update the contractor, take an action against the contractor, rather than bringing technology need to it, or budget need to it, or changing the working environment or automation to it. So mitigating action plans are very myopic. There's a clear need of training requirements. They clearly lack it. They lack the skills. They don't understand the skills a lot of time. What is the risk management activity? In 80% of the companies, it runs just like a compliance activities. So another area which we clearly saw was interlinkage between the risk management activities and the business KPIs. So performance of the individual has to be linked with the risk management. So one of the areas we clearly see in the design, for example, a design risk. In infra company, design is the biggest risk. So if you have to have a risk management procedures, and your business KPIs should be linked to it. So you may have a design operational challenges, but then you have to have a risk management procedures pertaining to designing activities, version controls, reason for changes, scope changes, everything. So there is no interlinkage to it. Again, risk remoting is not very effective. There's another thing we saw it, that they clearly present the risk. There is no action plan, target dates, mitigating action plan which is reported. Only a few risks are reported to the board, not monitored. Even top management is not really involved in the action plan. It is run like a compliance activity and a tick in the box approach. And in many companies, policies and procedures also not updated. So these are generally voices we hear from the management, or whenever we go for the ERM engagement review, assessment review. So how we see entire journey and where the company lies, we really try to map it. So in ideal scenario, it works from traditional. So there's a maturity structure to it, from traditional risk management. So in a private company, what we generally see is that functions generally take care of the risk. Maybe accounts department will take care of their financial reporting risk. but there's no risk registers are there, and the risks are largely financial and hazardous, safety related, or tomorrow financial, maybe loss of cash, loss of profit, or physical risks are largely focused upon, and these are largely resides in the function only, and the approach is more of a compliance oriented. But when the organization matures, it has to mature as risk management system. So private, for example, private limited company going for an IPO, he will have 10 different risks altogether. He will have a more governed supervision. There will be no more whistleblowers. There will be more investor scrutinies around that. So obviously, there's a need to mature your risk management structures. You are more susceptible to the risk as your company grows, and nature of internal operations also gets complex. So generally companies have this journey of then they start maintaining a centralized tracker around that. The understanding of risk develops, and there's a linkage. But then clearly what we see is these are largely isolated activities. Policies and procedures are defined, but then not reinforced and linked to the performance parameters. Again, the risk management is largely a compliance in nature, regulatory compliance in nature. But then what is the need of an hour for a growing organization, and particularly for top listed companies? They have to run this risk management activity more as a more of a strategic activity and business management tool to develop a right culture, to have a right technologies, and it should be continuous process. For example, uh, if tomorrow Dmart was a listed, was more of a private company, 2016, they had two stores only. It was pretty easy to manage. They become a listed company, so they are maturing their ERM framework. But tomorrow, if they are going to have 100 or 200 stores, then the risk management activity will be quite complex. You need to have a right warning signals from different sources. Compliance activities needs to be more robust. Culture has to be more important. Culture, I'll give you some examples in the subsequent slides to make it more pictorial and graphical. So this is an overall structure how companies go about it. So generally we follow Kosovo Framework. Kosovo Framework really helps us to gauge the maturity of the organization and gives a yardstick what are the principles to be applied to assess the maturity of the ERM companies running. So I have mapped down into the subsequent slide, but then I like to just run through, give a holistic view. So generally we classify this into the governance and culture. So it is very important to have a right governance and culture. Tone from the top is really important. If you have a company who doesn't have a right tone in from the top, and they are not into the right ethical practices, then that really follows. If they don't really monitor the risk, the process owners are not really worried about it. So it is very important to set the tone from the top, right culture, have a right team structure for the ERM activities, and they should demonstrate the core values. If they are not demonstrating the core values, like Tata's manage 50% of risk based on the core values. It is a clear example. Now, strategy and objective setting is very important. You have to clearly define your strategies and objectives. If you are planning to, for Tesla, if you want to become a Tesla and world #1 technology car company, then you have to set a objectives and accordingly identify the risk and appetite to it. So objective setting is very important, because that really opens the door what are the risks you will face when you are achieving your objectives, and accordingly you have to manage your appetite for the risk and resources and strategies and plans and tolerance limits. If tomorrow, if you are an online company, or then definitely, or you are more of a credits, then you may have, there will be defaults and everything. And if you have growth appetite, and rather than profit making sense, you are more into the growth phase, then accordingly you have to reset your appetite for the losses as well. Again, the performance, when you are doing a risk management activity, how robustly you are doing it. Are you rightly identifying the risk? Have you defined your risk assessment parameters, prioritization of risk, how you are prioritizing risk? Because to manage every risk, you will require resources. That is important. Whether this has been implemented, what is the response, is the again get a portfolio view. If you have 10 businesses, Reliance has 10 businesses, whether they have to have a portfolio view on the risk management. Okay, so it is very important on that sense. So media will have total different risk. They'll have your oil and gas will have different risk. So again, that is important to develop a portfolio view. Then again, how the risk is being reviewed, whether there is third party reviewing the risk, whether the board is reviewing the risk, whether there's independently consultant we have appointed to review the risk management structure. So these are layers which are covered in this bucket. And then finally, how are you leveraging on the right information technology like dashboards, intuitive dashboards you have, or that clearly gives you holistic as well as myopic view of the each area. For DMart, they may have a broader view how their 20 or 100 stores are working, and they may have they may still want a myopic view of one particular store. That intuitive dashboards and drill down approach can be only provided by the technology. And then it is very important how you communicate as well. Communication protocol has to be defined, as well as reporting of risk, culture, and performance. So now once I'll cover this area, so that I'll run through a few annexures to clearly make you visible what are the activities around that. So board, now since we are doing the governance checkpoints, if you are an auditors or you have to do it for the client, how you see it. So you have to first see the governance board, right? The board risk oversight. Is board really involved in the risk management activity? Have they made an attempt to develop a framework? Are they monitoring it? Is the risk reporting happened to the top level? Have they defined the risk culture, right risk culture? Because Tata has developed the risk culture. Okay, this is the appetite or the things they can tolerate, and after outside that it has to be escalated. What is the frequency of review? It cannot be that once in 2 years you just review the risk for the compliance purpose. What is the robustness? Tone should come from the top itself. If senior management is not really serious about the risk management activity, no one can help in the company. Process owners are least bothered then. It's blinking. Is it visible to you all?
Yes, it's visible, sir.
Huh. So it is very important that there has to be tone from the top, who helps in where entire framework has been developed from identify for roles, responsibilities are defined, so organized structure is defined. Now coming to the second point, whether your risk management structure, governance structure is defined, as we discussed in earlier slides. If you remember this particular slide, whether you have the risk management structure or not. So this is a risk management structure. So risk management, so whether the risk management structure is defined, the roles and responsibilities are defined, is it adequate to manage the operations? Google risk management structure will be totally different from Reliance, and Reliance risk management structure will be different from maybe a small listed company or Happiness Mind or whatever it may be. It depends on the nature of the people you are monitoring, whether the level of authorities are also defined. How 5 levels are required, 4 levels are required, management council is required, whom it will be reported to whenever there is a high risk, whether it will be reported to the RMC or not, reporting structure to the board, what risk will be reported to the board, communication protocols are defined. Again, independent assurance is coming or not. Tomorrow, if the risk chief risk officer is reporting to the CFO, then there is a biasness. No financial risk will be reported to the RMC ever. It is very important that right organization structure is there and independence is as well there. Again, whether there is a coordination with the risk internal department. So tomorrow your risk coordinator, risk CRO is working and identifying the strategic risk, but there is no coordination with the internal function. They may identify that health and safety is the biggest risk, but then it is not covered in their internal plan itself. So there has to be linkages between them. So ideally, how it really works in our company, let's show you a slide. So really, every time you go about it, so whenever you make a audit program or something, or identify the inherent risk, you have to clearly map a risk assurance map. As a first line of defense, you feel that what is the risk you have. Is it robust enough? Product development, you believe it, you have a strong control, inherent risk is pretty less. Then comes a second line of defense, and then you come as a third line of defense. So your coordination with internal department is very important, because that will help you to manage your inherent risk to residual risks. So generally we map, every time we go it, we make an internal plan, we have this three-way approach. Okay. Tomorrow, if we don't, if there's a clearly robust mechanism for health and safety, or maybe product development or manufacturing operations, there was good MIS system in place. There's a periodic review meeting. Every exception, the processes are well automated. Then definitely you may not require internal every year. You may do it twice in a year. There may be some area which is clearly left out. It may be an important area, but is not covered by anyone. So really, whenever you make a scope of work, you coordinate with internal department. It's very important to make a risk assurance plan. So I'll just go hands and forth for the clarity of the discussion. Now, coming from the desired risk culture, I've been telling a lot on that side. There has to be desired risk culture. Does a company want to be risk aware, risk neutral, and risk averse? It clearly depends on what company wants to be. So many companies want to be risk aware or risk aware. It has to clearly set from the tone from the top, how the management clearly communicates to them. What is the desired risk culture? Is there any guidelines or culture or seminars, open town hall which happens? What is the desired way? Because it really, so whenever you make a decision, it really impacts you. So tomorrow, if your company doesn't have an appetite for the risk, for the compliance, non-compliances, then really, whenever they are making a decision, they will clearly restrain from it. For example, a big four in one of the big four had a really compliance issues, and they had no appetite for taking any conflicting engagements, maybe which may be perceived as a conflicting engagement. So their risk policies has been accordingly amended. So we as a manager clearly know we cannot do such engagement which has a perceived conflict as well. Maybe in case of another example is maybe a company is going into Russian market, but they may not be sanctioned, but then management clearly has the guidelines that you cannot go and do a business in a Russian market to avoid compliances, to avoid any perceived sanctions or risk. So there has to be defined risk culture. So maybe I like to demonstrate more with a few examples. So whether again the employees really has an open hand to escalate the risk, even if it's conflicting with the goals and strategies of the organization. For example, tomorrow infra company has senior management as a clear direction, we will not take any projects which have a negative margin. But then you are making you're in a budgeting team and projections team, and you want the engagement in a tendering team, and you know this particular project is going to make a loss, but that is really important for the growth of the organization, that employees can escalate to senior management, and risk cannot be considered negative. People should be ready to discuss. So generally what we do is we conduct a survey in the organization to assess and what of the risk, assess the culture of the company. I'll just go and explain you a few of the cases, so how we go about it. So I have done a risk culture survey. So generally what we see is risk culture is different at different pockets of the company. So top management may be very risk aggressive, and junior management may be risk conservative. They don't want to lose their job. So that may happen whenever you make a decision, so accordingly people react to it. So tone from the top is not very aggressive. So maybe marketing company, maybe a product marketing company, really some senior management will be very aggressive with the discounts and everything, but junior management doesn't want to give that discount because they believe that KPI will be hit. So again, the risk perception and attitude varies from various hierarchies, and risk culture is not integrated. Because it may happen that your KPIs are not linked with your risk desired risk culture. Your KPIs may be in different direction. They may clearly say that you cannot do any maybe deviation from the compliances, but then your KPIs as an appetite, you said that there cannot be no non-compliances, but then your KPI really gives you high market sales target. Or you may be having that you may have a good, you'll provide a good work-life balance as a goal to the employee, but then your targets are pretty high, performance targets are pretty high to achieve. So we clearly there's inconsistency between goals and the KPIs and the decision making of the in the company. So there's no consistency around that. So we do a risk culture survey to gauge it, whether again awareness, a lot of things we do it, and see whether at what maturity the company is the leadership is more of a risk avoidance, they don't want to risk, they clearly don't know about the risk, and whether or they're risk aware, what is the appetite, if they are going to prefer growth over the profits, whether or is it really communicated to the employees. So again, this risk appetite has been defined and communicated. Is there any core value defined for the company, and whether it is consistent with their decision making as well, or the actions they take it. Are they open to the new challenges, or they want to maintain a status quo? Is the risk being seen as a more of a short-term resolution or long-term resolution? And again, sir, there are a lot of things. If the people have a lack of clarity on the roles, or they are aware of the risk responsibilities, so whether they are aware of the external risk or not, whether the adequate training has been given or not, or risk is seen as a more of a silo-based approach or more of a collaborative approach, or risk is more of a speculative or more of an informed decision making. So there are a lot of things we analyze during the risk culture survey and assess whether the company has a right risk culture or not. Because it clearly going to affect your decision making ability in the company. So as a middle manager, you clearly need to know what is the risk appetite of the company and what is the risk culture of the company. Again, commitment to the core values. Leadership has to demonstrate the core values, and clear and consistent communication has to be there. What is an acceptable behavior or not, and whether the ethical behaviors are being rewarded. Now coming to the talent part, people management part, whether company has the right skills to or talent to manage the risk. Maybe if you are looking for the acquisitions, strategic acquisition, whether you have right skills to identify the company or do a research and everything and manage such risk, or maybe you are in a hedging market, whether your person has the right skills and talent in place. And even for the performing that ERM engagement financial risk, whether you have the right skills and talent in place, whether your employees can access to the expert advices, whether internal or external on risk matters, whether the risk management is the performance appraisals are linked to the risk management activities. For example, I'll just give you one example how it is generally happens in a company. So for example, CISO has clearly a target that cyber incidents should not in a particular quarter exceed 5 to 10, or CHRO has a target that employee satisfaction should be more than 80%. The same may be staff turnover ratio or succession planning ratio. And similar to the CFO, that ineffective control should not exceed 5%, and financial inaccuracy should not exceed 1 or 2%. So again, the risk has to be linked to the performance indicators, their performance parameters. So you can clearly see this exercise is not just about identifying the risk and reacting to it. It is more of a planning the risk, developing a framework, culture, objectives, goals, everything around that. Now, when we strategies and goal setting, it is very important whenever we do it, whether we have external and internal, so business context, it is very important. Whenever we define a risk, it has to be linked to the objectives and business context. the risk of a DMart will be different from Reliance Industries, or Walmart risk will be different from the DMart risk. So obviously, nature in which you are operating, okay, the Walmart, so Amazon is a different, has a different risk than a DMart. Amazon technology will be a bigger risk than a DMart. So again, it may be internal or external. The risk environment in which you operate defines the risk profile of your company. Accordingly, you have to prioritize the risks. Risk appetite. Risk appetite is one of the things we have been discussing a lot. But when I clearly see, maybe I've done an audit of the review of 10 companies, I have found only 1 or 2 companies have really defined the risk appetite. So this is really important. So what is risk appetite? I'll clearly show you an example. So risk appetite at organization, it can be at 3 levels: organizational level, risk category level, and individual risk level. For example, strategic risk, company is willing to accept a risk from the emerging technologies, and financial risk, they have a low appetite. Legal risk, they have a low appetite, but they have a low appetite for the health and safety risk, and a low appetite for the breach of information. So they may have a different level. So this is more of a quality statement they make for the particular category of risk. But then if you really go and analyze for the individual risk, they may say, okay, they are willing to take risk on certain matters. Maybe on the sales side, they are willing to take risk. Maybe on the compliance side, they are not willing to take risk. Okay, they are willing to take risk on the technology side. From the transformation perspective, new projects, they are willing to take risk. They are not willing to take risk on any intellectual property non-compliances or regulatory or fraud or data privacy point of view. So your risk appetite may change based on the different type of risk. Okay, so that is how companies have to manage their risk appetite. So this risk appetite will define how much will be clearly helping you in the decision making. Okay, so again, so does the organization have well-defined risk appetite linked to their strategies? So management has to clearly say, since we have to grow 10x, we are open for a bad debt of maybe 2x or 3x or 4x. So it has to be syncing to the business objectives and strategies you are doing. And whether CXOs, board of directors, or risk management committee is getting involved. Again, it is very important to involve your it should be communicated to all organizations, and that all employees should be aware of the risk appetite. Okay, that is very important. So tomorrow, if you are going to as a marketing person, you should clearly know that, okay, we are ready to sell certain to the certain risky clients as well, or we should not sell to the particular client which has a credit risk associated with it. Again, the risk appetite has to be periodically reviewed and updated. As we discussed, that most important thing in the entire thing is that every risk has to be clearly linked to the business objectives and goals. So what we see is that many companies have the vision, but they don't have a roadmap for 4 years. They really don't know where to go in next 3 years. They don't have a strategy document for next 3 years. They are just doing business on a day-to-day basis. Management doesn't have a bird eye view how they are going to move in next 3 years. It's very important. If you don't know where you want to go, then clearly there's something you may not be able to identify the correct risk and invest your resources accordingly. Tomorrow, if you want to grow from brick and mortar company to a technology company, accordingly your risk will change. So if you are modifying your processes, for example, tomorrow you are modifying your financial processes from hard copy based to scan copy based, so your risk will be different. So scanning a wrong document is a bigger risk rather than which was not earlier there in the when you are certifying the hard copies in person. The risk changes. The business objective is very important. So clearly, three-year roadmap has to be there. Mission goal has to be clear. What they have to prioritize, whether they have to prioritize safety over production, or what is their priorities, it will clearly define. Again, your strategies should be linked to your objectives and risk. Again, your chosen strategy should be linked to the risk appetite. If you want to grow 5 times, then clearly your risk appetite should be aligned to it. So how we see one of the things clearly when we see how the risk changes. So how really it happens is that, so if you just see the risk in isolation, it may have a minimal impact on your business objectives. But when you map it to your objectives and see the risk, it will have a different impact. Okay, so maybe innovation may be not that the bigger risk if you want to maintain the status quo, but if you want to grow 5 times, then innovation is going to be bigger risk, and skills and talent is going to be bigger risk to match the gap. But if you really see demand tomorrow, today demand doesn't have a risk, talent may not be a risk for the demand, but if they are to grow into technology company, definitely skills and talent from the technology skills side is going to be risk for them. So you have to link your business objectives and the risk heat map. It has to be working against the objectives of the company. That is the one mistake the company makes it. They clearly see the risk in isolation. So any questions till now, or should I go ahead?
So as of now, no questions. So I think
Any
please go
questions?
ahead at the end of the session. I think they will ask.
I understand this topic is a bit engrossing. Any messages?
No, so please continue, Sudip. I think at the end of your session, by so this they will start asking the questions.
Yeah. Yeah. So now we are coming to how the risk management activity really performs in a company. So point number 10, if you see risk management activity, whether you have a defined procedures, plans in place, whenever you are assessing the maturity of a risk management process, you have to clearly see whether the policies and procedures has been defined, well documented, whether there's a formal process to identify new risks. So how you generally identify new risks? There has to be a external risk scanning system, or so when you how you identify the risks. So it may be a lot of ways in you identify the risks. So I'll just give you some information how we identify the risk. So it can be through brainstorming sessions, we can identify the risk, maybe internal workshops. We can. So Preeti has a question. I'll just move to that as well. So Preeti, I can answer you right now or afterwards. Yeah.
I think so.
So there are a lot of companies in which the ways in which the risks are identified. Just a second. So brainstorming session is one way in which they identify the risk. Whether they have a workshops, again workshop, what level of people are involved, whether senior management are involved, middle level management involved, whether people from all the sectors or all the functions are involved, from all geographical territories are involved or not, whether they have maintained their documented knowledge base, like risk registers, have they maintained it? Is there any lessons learned from the projects, new projects executed or on the previous years, or whether they are doing some scenario analysis on that part as well. So or the historic information again. So these are largely inward technology techniques. There it may be other techniques as well, that see, do the competition analysis, read the publications from the publications of the good consulting firms for the sector. So these are some of the external scanning system people do it. See the annual reports or IPO documents of your competitor if they are issuing it, or red hearing perspective, what are the risks they are perceiving. So people really identify the risk from various ways, and then whenever you identify the risk, you record it in the risk register. So ideally you start recording, you first record the risk register and then start to assess it. It is very important that every time you identify risk, you record it in the risk register itself. So that happens. So you have to, as a process, when you are assessing the maturity of a firm, first you see the policies are there, templates are defined for the risk registers or not, whether new risks are being identified or the same repeated risks are being coming up. Something like cyber risk. you just have to know that cyber is emerging risk, whether they have even identified such risk or not. And again, it is very important to identify the risk, root cause of it. So it clearly, what are the contributing factors to the risk? You have to really know. Tomorrow, you cannot say just see the health and safety is a risk, whether it's a people issue or what are the or it's a technology issue or it's more of a legacy issue. It should clearly mention whether and what are how you are going to remediate it will be only known if the contributing factors and root causes are mapped in the risk identification stage itself. Now, the next stage is on the risk assessment. So once you identify, so tomorrow I'll say just health and safety is the biggest risk, or employee attrition is the biggest risk, or a design is the biggest risk in infra company. No, it cannot be. It has to be gauged in a uniformity consistently across the organization, because every departmental head will say that their risk is the biggest one, or they would hide the risk. Depends on the action they have to take. So every department will react differently to different risks. So it's very important that uniform parameters are being defined whenever you are assessing the level of risk, whether it's high, medium, low, and that it has to be well documented, and what methodology you follow to rate them. That is important. And finally, you have to evaluate the inherent risk and residual risk, and what is the target risk. Many come. So I'll just give you an example again in this part. For example, like how does company go about it? So there's a risk assessment matrix. So they have clearly said that any financial risk where the financial impact is more than 2% of the revenue, it is high risk for me. Or PBT impact is more than 0.5%, it's medium, up to 2%, and it's less than 0.5%, we are okay with it. Or from the business continuity planning, tomorrow whether it will permanently damage the continuity or it will be temporarily damaging for a month or two, or it is or for a day or so, it depends. For IT company, even a single day is a high risk. Maybe for other services, even 15 days may not be, a business continuity may not be that important. For IT company, they are providing services to the banks and everything. They cannot have a downtime error of even an hour as well. So definitely how you prioritize rate your risk is very important. So again, this clearly comes from your risk appetite. It is linked to your risk appetite. If tomorrow a company says they have a zero appetite for the non-compliances, then everything is a high risk for the company. Tomorrow the company says that okay, we have an appetite that till 50 lakhs we are okay with it, then it may be minimum low risk. If they believe that everything we cannot have an appetite more than CR or any imprisonment case, then it will be definitely rated as high risk. So you have to clearly ensure that defined policies and risk parameters are there from the assessment point of view. Okay, so generally how we see in a company, they have a financial point of view, business continuity point of view, data security point of view, regulatory compliance point of view, impact on brand or technology point of view. It may vary. Again, this is more for 3 parameters. It may have a 5 parameter structure as well. It depends on the maturity of company. Generally, companies start with the 3 structure and move to the 5 structure. Okay, and so how it really works? So any high observations will be reported to the board, RMCs. Maybe medium observations are reported to the management council, and low observations are generally monitored by the process owners itself. And the chief risk officer will ensure that right impact assessment has been done or not. So this is how companies go about it. So for example, company will have an impact rating and likelihood rating, and then they will have a criticality. So whenever there's a high rating, this will be multiplied. So impact rating and likelihood rating will multiply, and if breaches the threshold limit, then it has to be rated a high. So these are all, anything which is rated above 5 is high rating in this year and this case. So in the year the score is 25, so it's high. If it's 20, it's high. If it's between 15, then it's medium. So this is the way company go about it. So again, these are risk again. So you can clearly see how the IT company has done it, impact and likelihood assessment, and their severity, and this top 10 risk, more than 10 will be reported to the board along with the risk mitigation plan. So it is very important that company has a defined risk assessment metrics, and it should be can be qualitative and quantitative as well. It can so maybe in a business continuity planning, the parameters were more for qualitative in nature rather than quantitative in nature. But then you have to assess that is there any defined methodology or not. So again, how it is done is then this rating is given, whether this rating has been how it is given. It is given through surveys or workshop sessions, or multiple people give the ratings. So you have to clearly see how the rating is given, because every people will give a different rating and have a perceived different impact assessment for a rating. For example, in case of there's a fire in the premises, so many companies will say shutdown of operations or loss of stock. So really it is very difficult to envisage such risk and the impact of such risk. So it is better to do a survey of senior people out there and get a scores. So generally how we go about it, we conduct a survey. So here how we go and conduct the survey. So we conduct a survey where over 50 people, senior management people get involved. They give the score. Okay, this particular risk has a high likelihood, and they rate it 3.3, and then some people will rate 2, and then average will be taken for the risk rating and prioritization purpose. So again, the different companies have different ways to find out impact. Some may go very methodological. They may find impact based on research, data backed up. I did an risk assessment for a gas company. They had a more of a data driven approach, where the risk management, the impact assessment was more of a data driven. So they clearly said that, okay, tomorrow if there's a loss of market share due to expiry of the licenses in the gas distribution, what is going to be the impact? Or tomorrow there gas vehicles will be replaced by electrical vehicles, what is going to be the impact? So they went about more methodological approach. Again, it depends on the organizational maturity. So every company at a different maturity will work in a different manner. So generally people start with the survey method, and then when the organization mature, they move to the more data driven approach. Sorry. Okay, so we did it again. The risk mitigation, the ownership of risk mitigation is very important. So what we see is people just respond to the risk. Ownership is not there. The wrong person may be giving answers to it. So it is very important that ownership of the risk, identified risk are being mapped. So tomorrow, if production person feels that technology is really a challenge, then production person cannot be a responsible person. Okay, for mitigation of risk, it has to involve a senior management. There has to be a chief technology officer who is responsible for it. There has to be a chief operating officer who is responsible for it. Okay, is there an automation required? You have to map the right process owners for action, because every risk mitigating action will require certain funds, budgets, again change of processes, change in skill sets, and process owners may not be equipped enough to remediate that gaps, or risk owners may not be equipped enough to remediate some action plans, to implement such action plans. Again, so whenever this risk mitigation plan is given, is there any independent review happening? Whether CRO is really reviewing it or peer is really reviewing it, to ensure completeness of the risk mitigating action. Generally, it is very important for medium risk which are not reported to the board, that management action plan is concrete enough to mitigate the risk to the extent possible. Again, portfolio view of the risk is very important. For example, Reliance, in case of Reliance Industry, so when you are monitoring the performance of risk, you cannot have a company level broader view every time. It is very important to have a portfolio view every company or every segment will have a different views, and company should be represented or give a separate reporting for the same and separate trends for the same. For example, demand, a western region will have a different risk than eastern, their northern stores. Northern states may have a lot of culture issues, western region may not have a cultural issues. So remediation action plan and risk has to be seen at a product level as portfolio level as well, or different verticals of business. So in L&T, design risk is only important for the infra business, not for their IT business or their defense business or their maybe other in other domains. So clearly, how the risks are being seen to which department it is relevant. It cannot be that construction risk is overshadowing is in L&T is the highest risk, but then 50% of the company doesn't have a construction risk. They are more for an IT company. It is very important to give a right reporting and right categorization to the risk and based on their portfolio. So again, this risk assessment structure requires a sustainable change. I clearly said whenever there is organizational structure, change in organizational structure or change in company's business, risk again or change in the environment. There's a new tax law coming up for manufacturing or exports and everything. Again, the risk has to change accordingly. Your risk profile of the company does changes based on if the risk profile of the company changes, your risk identification process should change, your sources of risk identification may change. So it is very important that your policies, procedures are going to change, technological change with the maturity of the company. You may not apply the same checks and balances when if your turnover or your volume or the business scale just multiplies. So generally, how people go about it is that, so again, important is whenever there's risk is being identified, mitigated, and reported, is there any formal review mechanism? Generally, companies that just and LODR just require that risk has to be reported to the board. Again, it is from which risk are being reported, high risk are being reported or medium risk are being reported. It's important the right categorization risk reporting at various levels. So it cannot be that medium risk are being just managed by the risk operating or risk owners itself. It should be maybe reviewed at a risk management committee or a management council or maybe senior management. Again, there has to be early warning mechanism which really alerts. So tomorrow attrition was a high risk. You managed it pretty well. But then has to be a monitoring mechanism. So tomorrow, if again the risk attrition breaches the threshold limit of 15%, which was your appetite or your tolerance limit, there has to be a mechanism that it will send a warning signal to senior management. Okay, in Q3 the attrition was more than 15%. So this will trigger it, and risk escalation has to happen accordingly. That clearly shows the robustness of your ERM framework. Again, once you're doing it, is there any external review happening for the risk management framework? Is your policies, procedures, risk registers, your risk documentation, your risk metrics, assessment metrics, is that being reviewed by the third party or independent consultants, or is there any big audit done of the same? Because if once your size and scale multiplies, the old risk rating parameters may not apply in this case. In your risk profile changes, completely doesn't matter. If you are from brick and mortar company, you are becoming a technology company, or definitely cyber risk will be higher risk compared to the physical health and safety risks. So you have to, somebody external views are important on a periodic basis. So again, there's a need for continuous improvements on various levels, from people, process, or peer benchmarking is really important as well in the risk assessment framework. So any questions on this slide, or shall we move on?
As of now, no questions. Someone has posted.
Yeah. So coming to the last piece of it, so how really it works. So from information technology point of view, it's very important. So even your ERM is technology maturing with technology. I've seen 80%, 90% of clients maintaining the risk registers in Excel sheets or in some Word documents, but really it doesn't
अरे
help
MPO का ही करोगी ना?
because ownership and uniformity and consistency really
हाँ
lacks
तो MPO से
at
पूछो
various
ना, मैं तब
levels.
से बोल रहा हूँ
If
MPO
I
MPO
maintain the things in Excel sheet, obviously
हाँ
the warning implementation plans and warning signals, warning messages to the risk owners for implementation of mitigation action plan, that really doesn't trigger. Even what we see is then implementation is more of a silo based rather than organization based. For example, health and safety was a risk in plant A, but it requires there are 10 plants. Then it may not have a entity level mitigation plan. So it is very important that technology is in place to monitor, to at least record the risk, map the risk to the functions. Then even the action plans are well documented with a target date, warning letter, messages that goes to the employees. Risk escalation happens every time there's a medium risk turns into high risk. When it reaches the threshold, then escalation should happen to senior management. And there it can be various ways and means. Just presenting a boring Excel sheet or a Word document really doesn't give an insight to the senior management. I'll just show you some cases how it really makes a difference. So this is one way of presenting it, just writing the things across. But then how other companies go about it. So this is one of the dashboard for our stores, retail stores. It clearly shows, okay, this particular risk is within threshold or not. So there are 10 stores, and we did a review of 10 stores. Okay, in 3 stores it was within appetite, and in 7 stores the risk was outside appetite. So it clearly is in the high severity zone. So that gives a more of an inside view. Just writing it in an Excel sheet on a boring Word document really doesn't give an insight to the management. So it is very important to use technologies, data analytical tools, and dissect the data and give them the holistic as well as myopic view of the relevant risks. So I've seen in 80% companies, they just paste the information in the slide and they clearly just say that, okay, say there's a compliance issues in this particular stores, but then it doesn't give more information from various perspective. That is one of the complaints or maybe grievances of the independent director as well. For that it is information overload in the Word document. So again, from the communication perspective, there has to be clear communication in terms of protocol should be defined, when risk has to be escalated, whom risk has to be reported, what is the frequency of risk. So that should be clearly there, and what risk should be reported to the board, or what risk should be reported to the risk management committee, what should be the frequency, early warning signals, if you have early warning system signals, whom should have access to, and in case there's delay in implementation of risk mitigation plan, what should be an escalation metrics. So that is an overall structure we generally see in risk assessment maturity, the ERM maturity assessment. And then the last point comes how we are reporting the risk. Does the company have a standard format? That is very important. And whether they are reporting all the relevant risk in a right fashion. So what I did an audit of one company. So they kept on reporting 10 risk every quarter, high risk. Okay, these are our high risk. We didn't had a concrete management action plan, and whatever management action plan was there was no subsequent reporting in the next meeting on the status update. They every time they used to say that this is the risk. Okay, there is a risk of leakage, gas leakage at this particular plant, and they are moving the plant to the Dahej. Okay, there's no follow up on that. There was no action plan. So there was a risk that this particular product has a competition risk, and we are developing new product. Okay, they are every time they come up with the top 10 risk, and there was no follow up for the previously reported risk. So it is very important to set template, and it should have a clear targeted oriented risk mitigation plan, whether short term or long term. And it is okay that you have a milestones on a piecemeal basis. Okay, if you have to shift your plant from urban to a rural area for the compliance purpose, it will take at least a long journey and will require a committee, but it has to be a detailed roadmap instead of be high level 10,000 feet answer, it really doesn't help. So we clearly see that sharpness of the reporting is missing out in many companies. They don't clearly demonstrate the profiles. This profile, cyber security, you cannot just write cyber security. You have to drill down. If cyber security, what is an IT landscape you have? What are the critical points you have? What are the backup plans you have? What are the insurance policies you have? So clearly, then it should be articulated with the status, facts, and everything, and then take up to the management. You cannot write one word and go about it. I'll give you an example as well. Then what is the indicative trend? Whether the cybersecurity risk has come down from the last quarter or gone up? Whether the existing controls are adequate enough or not? These are something you have to clearly demonstrate in the meeting. And very important is new risk and emerging risk are also being reported. So many people will miss out. The thing is they don't report the emerging risk. So we discussed ESG as growing risk. First it was more of a compliance risk, now it is strategic risk. Now even your customers are requiring a certificate. If you are exporting a textile to European countries or food products, they clearly require a compliance certificate on ESG part. So risks are changing, their landscapes are changing. So again, if you are into the capex business, if you are having new projects or you have a new line of business, your risk profile will change and particular risk has to be demonstrated accordingly and reported to the management. So at least they will have the view on the new emerging risk and they can provide an inputs. And again, if you have done the risk culture survey, the findings can be reported. Okay, what are the outcomes of risk culture survey? How the people perceive the risk, how middle management perceive the risk, how they are, whether they are risk averse or not, whether they feel that training has been done given adequately or not. That risk culture survey outcome should be reported. So this is an overall landscape we give, rating we give. So based on the checklist and the assessment we do, whether they are nascent stage or defined stage or advanced stage. So again, this parameter may change differently for different you may have your own parameters, but generally how the companies. So this is backed up with the detailed observations as well, what we know or what we have observed that we report it separately, but this is largely based on the Kosovo principles. We have the assessment metrics, maturity assessment metrics for the company. So again, the new challenges. Once you have done your implementation, then the challenges is whether it's a continuous process. So what we see is that in many organizations, at least I'll say 50% organizations start the risk management activity, then it slows down. Again, when they have to report it, they start it again. So it has a flip-flop approach, stop-start approach to it. Many companies, what really happens is they start it, okay, then it gets stagnant. They don't have new capabilities, no technology investment happens. So they may be identifying top 10 risks of the company, that is it. They just identify, do a workshop, that is it. They don't invest in the technology or skills of the people or training on the people. On the training of the people. So for example, I'll give. So I did a audit of really a risk management review of a company. The CFO main concern was that they are not coming with the right risks, and even the risks are not maturing enough. So the chemical company, what was the top rated risk was every 5 of the risk was that plant they may have an accident, their operations may stop. There may be an accident, there may be chemical leakages. So it was more of an operational in nature, and there was no skills applied to it, no external risk scanning process was applied to it. It was largely internal facing. That's for internal facing. So for the sake of compliance, it just started the risk management activities, and once the compliance activity stopped, again it went back to the business as usual. In the next stage, in other company where I did, they had a good maturity, they had a stable risk management process, but again it was mainly in Excel sheets. So they started doing it, risk management activity, but then they couldn't grow the capabilities. So how again risk management activity really works is that one is you identify the enterprise level risk, then you identify the business level risk, then you identify the more of a ground level risk, third level of risk. Okay, again your maturity to monitor the risk will only depend through technology and your processes. People start with the risk management activity for the top 10 risk and that is it. They don't invest and then they continue doing that activity. For example, DMart. For DMart, top 10 risk may be cyber or competition or ESG or maybe loss of, or maybe e-commerce business, but that is not the case. If they have to grow as a company, they have to also go to the bottoms region-wise risk, then stores level risk, then it has to integrate into their risk management dashboards. It should have a drill down approach. Okay, so person has to see a holistic view, may directly see it, okay, company level CFO will see, okay, this is the top risk. For us, e-commerce is the main threat, okay, but for the western region it's more of a cultural issues, that is a bigger threat. Okay, now coming to Surat, okay, this 10 stores has this particular risk, so that is both an evolving process. You are developing, having new technologies, new capabilities, new skill sets, new ideas, new KPIs, warning signals around that. So that is how we go about it, and so it has to move from stagnant to consistent. Here is how you develop. It requires not just the capabilities, funding, resources, technology interventions. That is how we go about it from a maturity structure point of view. So this is how it really works. To sum up that, I'll give few examples as well. How
Sudeep,
reporting happens in many companies. So many companies do this activities. They identify the risk, they report it. So for an optical fiber company, what they did it was they do top 10 risks, that is it. Okay. An optical fiber company, they identified top 10 risks, what are the challenges they had it in the market. Okay. What are the technological disruptions they are going to, for an optical fiber manufacturing company, they are really worried tomorrow microwave may be alternate option, or wireless relays or radio waves or satellite signals may be on option. So for example, Tesla, this Elon Musk has this Starlinks. Tomorrow it may replace the internet, broadband internet, which works on a fiber optics cable. So they have identified external risk, everything, but these are largely one-way traffic. Okay, they have identified the risk. It is not supported with the tangible impact and everything. It is more of an idea. It doesn't assess what is the level of risk, high, medium, low, what is going to be impact, not driven by the data or insights, or what is the impact in particular region. So maybe in villages it will have a different impact in urban areas. So that clearly is not substantiated well. It's more of an idea and raw answers given to it. So we did an exercise for them and we had clearly defined a lot of statistics, impacts, and did a market research and what is going to be impact of this particular risk on your thing. So again, this was presented to the management. What are the specific risks due to the technology changes? What is the root cause? What is an impact? What is the current production? And that gives more insight to the management on the action plan. And again, you can build your own warning signals for different type of risk. Maybe attrition. So for lower management, it can be 20% attrition is okay. For senior management, 10% attrition is not okay. So tomorrow you will start your own program. So you have to define the KPIs, one warning signals for monitoring and reporting of such risk. So again, I give you an example how it works at a different level. So in total, that is how we assess the risk assessment metrics, maturity of the risk assessment metrics. So it is too much to cover in one session. Probably maybe 2-3 sessions will really help us to explore more and give more practical life examples. So any questions from your side?
yeah. So Sudeep, Preeti has asked the question that can you give some real life example? Hello, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible. Gaurav, you can go
Can
on.
you give some real life example where you have framework brought a visible difference in the organization which they have adopted? Otherwise, the flow is below the radar. Yeah. See, what really happens is that people don't cover this journey in a year. It will have its maturity cycle. At least a listed company with a low maturity will take 3 years to achieve this maturity. They have to first set up a risk management function. That is one way. People have to map the risk registers. What is the risk of HR department? They have to map it. Then they have to define the guidelines. They have to define a process. So that really takes some time. They have to give the trainings to them. Then they have to set up the risk management committee. And then before risk management committee, everything cannot go to the risk management committee. It has to be discussed at a management council level, where CFO comes into play or CXOs come into play, and they discuss certain risks. So really, it has its own process. And then once you settle down, your risk registers are updated, your KPIs are updated, then you bring in a technology piece to improve the efficiency and robustness of monitoring. So we have done it for a lot of clients. We are doing it for some of the big listed companies, including a retail giant as well, and many other companies. So, but it is a staggered process. You cannot change the entire thing in one day. At least it will take 2-3 years, and it has to integrate with your ERPs and other operating systems to give the right warning signals for monitoring purpose. So it has to be from one-time activity to more of a concurrent activity that will give a warning signal to the senior management as well. Yeah. So Preeti, you can open your mic and we can talk on that as well.
Hi, Sudeep, because see, the way I look at it is that where
Yeah,
it
Preeti,
is
you
a
are not audible.
regulatory. I'm not. Hello, am I not audible?
No, you are audible.
Hello.
Okay. So my question to you is that what I have seen is where it is a regulatory requirement. There the
Hello, Preeti,
organization.
you may type your question.
Okay. I'll.
Hello. Yeah, Mr. Sudip, can I ask a question?
Yes, sir. Please.
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Any
Like a
questions
risk.
from anybody?
Yeah. My name is Shakil. I just had some question. One is, see, I'm in an internal auditor in a private limited company. So what I see
Yeah.
that.
So another question was whether there would be one-time cost in setting the infrastructure, and then it will be recurring cost. Yes. So again, you are right. So it's not about one-time cost. It has to be invested in a piecemeal basis. So if a person starts with defining the policies and procedures, org structure, then they start. So there is a journey to it. So it will go for piecemeal investment and cost involved, and then management efforts are involved. But then entire cycle will take 3 years. At least 2 to 3 years what we have seen in journey and commit from the top management. Commitment from the top management is more important than the other things.
Yeah, hi Sudip, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Murtaza, sir.
Murtaza, I'm happy to answer.
Gaurav, someone else was asking the question.
Yes, so Sudeep, Preeti has written her question.
Yeah, I had one question.
Yes,
Yeah,
please go ahead.
myself, Shakil here. Yeah. Is there any format, risk register format, or any software available to maintain a risk register?
Yeah. So, this is one example. So Preeti, on that side, so it clearly is how company sees it. So it is very important how company sees it and what is the mindset of the management. So we have seen that risk management activities has been done by not just by the listed companies for the compliance purpose, but a lot of players itself. Because again, because it is more of a business management tool. We have seen some examples. I'll just give you some example. Recently, I had done a review with a logistics client. It is a startup client, and they are also moving for IPO purpose. But then they are really looking for the risk management as a core activity, so they can clearly get a visibility. What are the key risks which are in affecting the business? Their insights affecting the business. So a logistics client, I clearly remember, they clearly want to see the challenges the company is facing to manage the growth. So they have really grown 5 times, but then the profitability has drastically reduced. So they have installed the risk management activities, and the CEO is a key member of it. So it is more of an open town hall. They don't have very robust systems, but then it is more for open forums, and they have a risk registers, and high risk funds are allocated based on high risk which companies are facing. So every high risk has to be mitigated and reported to the investors. So that is, so even the investors are involved in risk management activities. So again, the question is, well, are there any tools to map for the risk registers? So I have shown you a format. So this presentation have a risk management format. So companies may have, there are few tools available in the market. So I'll give you an example. I've done recently an audit for a IT client. Maybe LTI is an example. LTI has a tool itself. That was they have made a tool, in-house tool. They have a risk management tool where they map it. Risk owners are mapped. Even due dates are mapped. Whether it's, again, they map it whether it's applicable for a function or for a unit or for an entire organization. And accordingly, risk management mitigation plans are being monitored. Again, risk mitigation plans are further divided into 3-4 layers based on target dates. So there are tools available in the market. So,
Okay. Is there any question from anyone else? Uh, I think there's no such question. So Preeti, hope your question has been answered by Sudip.
so
Gaurav, someone was asking a
Murtaza sir,
question. Someone was asking something, Gaurav, but I think the speaker is not able to listen to that person. I
any
think.
questions?
Whatever.
Any other questions for anyone?
so sir, Sakil was asking the question, so that I have written over the chat box what he has answered.
Sudeep,
Any
can you
questions?
see that?
Hello.
Yes, yes, Sakil sir,
Gaurav?
please.
Yeah, I think Mr. Sudip is not able to hear. If you could note my one more question is, I'm in a private limited company. Now, I believe it is not mandatory to have these ERM, right? But how to go about if we want to introduce it in a company? How to go about it? Like, because it's a very subjective area, very complex and very subjective. Where to start? I mean, some hint if you could give. Am I clear?
Yes, sir. So Sudeep, Sakil sir has asked one question I have posted.
Hey, Gaurav, I think he cannot listen to us. Okay. While joining, he would not have activated. So, like, I think he can only see the notes. Okay. Gaurav, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So Sudeep is not able to listen to anyone. Okay. He can just see the chat box, and when he speaks, we can all listen to him. So I think you need to call him up on his mobile and speak to him. Okay.
Okay, okay, sir.
Yeah. So Mr. Shakil,
Yeah.
One of the
uh,
question is that is ERM applicable to the private company? See, ERM in this format is not applicable. I clearly mentioned that. You can see in the slides that so as a board of director needs to ensure that risk management systems are in place. So that is important. So they may not have the full-fledged ERM system, but the risk management policy is something which is required. Okay, so people has to start with the risk management policy, and then they may identify top 10 risks, and then they can go with a less simpler risk management system. But from the compliance perspective, board of directors have to certify the risk policy procedures are in place. They should at least have the risk management policies in place, and they should adhere to it. It may be a simple structure that risk management policy should be raised and key risks should be informed to the management and reported in the board meeting. So it may be a part of the operations meeting itself. It may not have the proper risk registers and everything. So for a small company, that may work. But then as a board of directors, they have to satisfy themselves.
Okay, thank you.
So you can clearly see out there, this is the compliance.
Yeah.
So they may not have the detailed structure, tools and everything, but then it has to be, key risk has to be discussed in the board meeting, and board of directors has to report on that.
Okay. So I think anyone is having any question? Sanjay ji has asked the question. Sudip, can you please read the question of Sanjay ji?
So see, there are no clear benchmarks as such, and there are no clear benchmarks on the preparedness or ratings, anything. It is every company has to give their own views to it. So every company may have a different appetite. So there are no clear benchmarks or ratings assigned. It is more of an internal perception of the risk, and their internal appetite. So there are no clear guide as such external parameters defined to it. So even Kosovo doesn't give any external parameters.
Okay. Any more question? Disha.
See, how it really works is that people see again. Guidelines clearly doesn't say that which level of management should get involved, but from the effectiveness point perspective, middle management and senior management should get involved. Involving junior management will be too democratic process, so companies avoid it, and they believe if companies believe it junior management can be involved, they can be involved, but ideally for risk management identification is a risk owner's job. So risk owner's job is to identify the risk, and so generally middle management risk owners are generally middle management people, but then it can happen at different levels. So risk identification generally happens at different levels, and high risk are being reported to top management. There can be top-down approach or bottoms-up approach. So how it really works in a bottoms-up approach is that risk owners, which are generally middle management or junior management, report the risk to the business heads, and they in turn report the risk, the key risk, to the CRO and risk management committee. But then the challenge is what really happens in this case is that they have their very internal view of the risk. Then in a top-down approach, the external perspective is more involved. A CXO or CFO will give more of an external perspective. It has to be a mix of both. It is preferred that it happens at multiple level, but generally companies go with the senior and middle management. It is a company's choice which way they find it effective, and it also depends on the type of companies they are working in.
Okay, so Sudhir, just 1 minute. So I think whatever the question people you are having, you can post it to the on the group.
Compare
So
similar companies in different with a different perspective. For example, how can we compare the similar risk in same field? Yeah. See, it's basically external. See, comparison really helps in your external risk identification. Internal risk will be company specific. For example, if TCS believes private data security, privacy is a risk, then it is a company. See, sector at a large is at risk. So every IT company is supposed to have these sort of risk. But something like attrition, it can be very company specific. So tomorrow, Happiest Mind may not have such attrition as Wipro may have. It depends on the how performance driven the company is. So, but then comparing of companies with in the same sector really helps in identifying the sector specific risks.
Okay. So Murtaza sir,
Which are
over to you.
applicable
I
to the
think
all the companies.
Murtaza sir,
Yes, Gaurav.
yes, sir, over to you. I think he has
So
answered
I
all the
believe
questions.
we are concluding the session right now.
Murtaza sir, over to you.
Yes, yes. So, good evening, everyone. Uh, Interesting discussion. I've been listening to it, and I was looking at a lot of questions also. I think interesting questions as well. And Shakil ji raised one question. Let me answer one or two of them. So see, like in a starters organization, maybe identifying the processes which you want to cover, making a risk control matrix type of a thing. In the process, sub process, in the activities, identifying the risk and rating. Sanjay also asked. So rating, like again, it depends on organization to organization, whether it is an individual entity for which you want to do, or you want to look at the group turnover, etc. And the rating could be on the basis of financial factors, on the basis of like what do you say, reputation risk, compliance risk, multiple of them, and it could be a combination of impact and likelihood. And then you can arrive at a rating, and you can keep on doing it on a regular basis. But the most important thing is like, see, I think if you want to start slow on the ERM, then important is across the business, identify, talk to the process owners, make it a top-down discussion, and then identify the risk owners who are responsible, who on a regular basis will keep on updating the risk register, and then only the ERM or the risk register will keep on getting updated, and it will keep on moving ahead that way. So a very, very long discussion, I think, and Sudeep was talking about a lot of things, and each organization, I think, will have to have a different approach. So I thought let me touch upon one or two of those aspects. Gaurav, Bhavin, is there anything specific that you want me to cover?
Yes, sir.
No, sir, I think.
Enlighten the group with yeah. Gaurav, you wanted to speak? Go.
You please continue.
Yeah, audible.
So if you can, if you can throw lights and guidance with respect to the future of internal audit and the how the firms can go way forward.
Yeah.
Uh,
See,
with,
yeah, yeah. Should I answer,
No, so
Murtaza?
Murtaza sir, I think Murtaza sir.
Mhm.
Sudeep, I will try and answer that.
Hmm.
That is okay
I
with
thought
you?
very exposed to me. Yeah.
Yeah. So, Bhavin, a very long question. Okay, maybe one of the next sessions, let me join and take maybe 20 minutes and talk you through about a couple of things. Okay. But right now, see, at WIRC, I think I would request everyone in the Internoid study group, we got about 60 registration to work back closely with the Internoid committee. And Bhavin from here is also in the Internoid committee, and maybe a couple of others. I think Sakina also, I can see she's also on the Internoid committee. So at the committee, we got a lot of plans. Okay. We are starting one Internoid refresher series, which will be like covering all the SIS in detail for 15 hours. It will be for beginners. So that is one. Along with IIA, Mumbai chapter and Bombay Chartered Accountant Society, again, we are planning some regular programs. And one with IIA is on the BFSI industry. We are doing a 3 hours thing, virtual. So industry specific Internoid programs, 2 hours, 3 hours, we're going to do every month. Internoid refresher we are planning. There is again a request to do an Internoid conclave type of a thing again in the month of December, which we will plan. And the Internoid committee has taken upon themselves to start writing 3 publications. And I would say if you guys can, anyone interested, support, that will be nice. And the one important thing which we are trying to pick up in the Internoid committee this year is like creating those risk control matrices industry by industry. And like say, if you pick up manufacturing, then in manufacturing, what does an audit universe look like? Okay, whether you want to do an HR audit or within HR you want to go and do employee reward and recognition, employee benefit, payroll, health, safety, well-being, whatever. Okay, and if you're going to break it up, something like that, then maybe how many items are auditable? 60, 65, 70, 80. List them down, and where does the process start, where does the process end, identify the boundary, and then maybe each one picks up a particular process 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, 4, and starts making the RCM, and then we have a review mechanism, and then we formulate this risk control matrices, and once everything is finalized, reviewed, we publish also by way of a hard copy book. We upload them on a WRC website, and we make it available free of cost to all the members who wants to download. That is a thought process. And then
I think
maybe this manufacturing and make auto, and then maybe something else and something else. Okay. Sorry, Gaurav, over to you.
no, sir. I think because I worked with you since last 3 years, so I think the initiative what you have taken, that is quite commendable, and I think a lot of medium and small size firm are going to take the advantage from this particular benefits.
Thank you, Gaurav. Thank you. So I think let us all, whoever has got time, whoever wants to work back, I think we got good leaders here. On the Internet committee, we have Bhavin Parikh. Bhavin was also a convener last time. He's been running the study group. And we also have Sakina on the Internet committee. Gaurav is here. He's also very active. We also have Murtuza Gadiali. And hence, like, what we can do is, whichever way anyone wants to be active, let us know and we'll take it ahead. And Bhavin, or Gaurav, to answer your question in terms of the future of Internoid, allow me some time, maybe in one of the next sessions. Like, give me 20,
Okay.
25 minutes at the beginning, and let me talk you through with some slides. Okay. So, like, because see, I think it is clearly very, very important that when we talk about the Internoid that we do today, not about the future, today, okay, it has to be a combination of analytics, data analytics. Selecting sample is one, but looking at whether you are using an Excel or a macro, or coding through an R or through a Python, or doing or using a idea tool, but analytics is important. The moment analytics is done, lot of insights will be thrown. The second piece which becomes important then is a Power BI or a Tableau type of a thing, which helps you in presentation of the graph, charts, diagrams. And now gone are the days of writing those English reports and going to the board and explaining to them. Okay, now you go to the board with all the data and with the live charts, and you tell them okay, like more than 1 crore vendor is so much. The board says, what if 80 lakh rupees? You just drag and drop, and then you say, okay, more than 80 lakh, so much is happening. Okay, and they love to see that. So dynamic reporting, dynamic dashboarding, the concepts which we are talking about. So I will be able to cover that as well. And then when you actually go into the compliance of the process, there are process mining tools like Celonis, and which large organizations will have to start adopting. And of course, there is a lot of data which can be pulled out from various systems and brought into a table or or in a particular format to run the queries, and the RPA bots will come into play there. And again, for reporting, there are so many other things. There are lots of tools which we can talk about, but I think that will need some time. Okay. But I try to cover briefly in 2, 3 minutes. So a lot of action. And believe me, at WIRC, we will be planning training sessions on each and every one of them. We are even talking to automation and anywhere and UI path for seeing if we can do a certificate course on RPA for our members and students. Okay. So hope that answers briefly. Anything else specific, Gaurav, Bhavin? Happy to answer.
Definitely,
No,
I think,
sir.
sir,
Great.
if you will start talking, so I know that the session is going to quite a long. So I think we should conclude the session, and thank you for the good insights. So I'll
Thank you.
request Manish Nathani to give a formal vote of thanks to Sudip Modi, our today's speaker.
Thanks, Gaurav. So, hello.
Yes, Manish, we can hear you.
Yeah. So, Sudip, thank you for the time and sharing your knowledge and the experience on the risk reporting. It was very insightful and very interactive with us. So, thank you for your time to take us through all the insights and the experience you have shared with us.
Thanks, Manish, and thanks, Murtaza, Gaurav, and Bhavin for giving us this platform to express my knowledge and share my knowledge. And whatever learning I have, it multiplies when you share with the people.
Thank you, Sudeep.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Sudip.
thanks, Sudhir.
Yep, yep.
So we also request what are the participants want from the next session. So if you can throw lights which all the session it has been required, so we can accordingly arrange. So I would request you everyone to just put it on the WhatsApp group the session what you require. So it would be for us benefit. What are the topics which you would be like to hear it about and more discussion.
So, okay. So, Bhavin, I think we should conclude.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you so much everyone for
Thank you,
participating.
everyone,
Thank you,
for joining.
Murtuza sir. Thank you, Murtuza sir, for joining.
Thank you.